Picture this. You're in your home, the place where your family has lived for generations. It's where your ancestors are buried and where your future is rooted. Then one day, soldiers show up, guns in hand, telling you and your family that you have to leave immediately. You have minutes, maybe even seconds, to grab whatever you can carry. The rest of your possessions, your house, your farm, your entire life, they're just left there. Where do you go? What do you do? Well, in the 1830s, if this happened to you and you were Native American, you would have been forced onto what became known as the Trail of Tears. Now, before we jump into this sad part of history, let's talk about something really cool. Okay, now let's get back to the video. This journey was one of sorrow and loss, but it was also a story of survival and resilience. So, the Trail of Tears began in the early 1830s when the US government passed a law called the Indian Removal Act. This act was basically a plan to kick 5 Native American tribes, the Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole, out of their homes in the southeastern states. The government said it was for everyone's own good, and that the Native Americans should move to an area west of the Mississippi River, which they named Indian Territory. Today, it's Oklahoma. The government even made a deal with some tribal leaders, who agreed to move their people in exchange for money and promises of better lands. However, most of the tribal members didn't agree to this deal, and they had every right not to, because they were US citizens. They had been living in the Southeast for centuries and had built their lives there. They had cities, schools, farms, and businesses. Their ancestors' bones were buried in the soil. Many of them spoke English, and some even had white blood in their veins, because of marriages between Native Americans and European settlers. The Cherokee Nation took their fight all the way to the US Supreme Court. In 1831, the court ruled in their favor, saying that they couldn't be removed from their lands. The president at that time, Andrew Jackson, didn't care about the court's decision. He wanted the land the Cherokee and other tribes were living on for white settlers, and he didn't want to share it. He ignored the court and started making plans to remove the tribes. In 1838, the military arrived in full force to carry out the removal. They surrounded the Cherokee towns and homes and forced the people out at gunpoint. They gave the families only minutes, sometimes just seconds, to pack what they could carry. Men, women, and children grabbed their possessions and were forced to leave everything else behind: their homes, farms, livestock, workshops, fields, and cemeteries. Some people refused to leave. They hid in caves or barricaded themselves in their homes. But eventually they ran out of food and had no choice but to surrender. Now imagine being part of a massive group of people walking hundreds of miles with little food, water, or shelter. The journey of the Trail of Tears was long and dangerous. It stretched for almost 1,200 miles across rugged terrain. Hot summers and cold winters, muddy swamps and rocky hills. People walked barefoot, sometimes wading through deep waters with bare feet. Babies were carried until they were too heavy and then placed on the ground to crawl. Mothers and grandmothers shared what little food they had with those who were weaker, even though they themselves were starving. People sang and told stories to keep their spirits up, but it was hard. Along the trail, thousands upon thousands of people died. They died from exposure to the elements, starvation, disease, and exhaustion. Smallpox was especially deadly, killing hundreds each day. Dysentery caused by contaminated water also claimed many victims, as did exhaustion. The dead were often buried in mass graves along the trail with little ceremony, just a quick hole dug with a bayonet and then filled back in. Those who survived the journey were often too weak to dig proper graves. For those who lost their loved ones, It was a heartbreaking experience. Not only did they have to cope with the grief of losing someone, but they also had to deal with the trauma of being torn away from their homeland and their ancestors' burial grounds. What makes this part of the story even sadder is that the people who died on the Trail of Tears didn't just lose their lives. They also lost their history and culture. Many of them had lived in the southeastern states for generations. Their ancestors had thrived in those lands and had built a rich culture based on their connection to the environment and their traditions. When they were forced to leave, they also had to give up a big part of who they were. During the journey, people's feet became infected from walking barefoot, and the lack of proper medical care led to many deaths. If you look closely at the sculpture, you'll see that the man's feet are bandaged, showing that he, too, may have suffered from this painful condition. Along the trail, there weren't enough supplies or doctors to help everyone, and those who got sick often didn't make it. Imagine watching your friends and family fall ill and die, knowing that you might be next. That was the harsh reality for those on the Trail of Tears. This trip was a huge undertaking. Most of the people doing it were farmers and tradespeople who had never traveled far from home. Now they were on a journey that was unlike anything they'd ever experienced. Thousands of people were moving at the same time, which meant they had to build camps to sleep in and find ways to feed everyone. There were also many arguments and fights along the way as people became desperate for food, water, and shelter. When you look at the picture, you might think it shows just a small group of people, but keep in mind that during the Trail of Tears, there were tens of thousands of people moving together, all looking for the same basic needs: food, water, and safety. The tension and stress of the situation must have been incredibly high. What's even more upsetting is that all of this happened because of a law passed by the US government. It was supposed to relocate the tribes, but in reality it was a forced expulsion. The government didn't care about the suffering it caused. In fact, many people involved in the removal saw it as a necessary evil. They believed that Native Americans were inferior, and that white settlers had the right to take their land. So who were the people who planned and carried out the removal? Well, it was a mix of federal and state officials, military personnel, and volunteers. President Andrew Jackson was a major supporter of the removal. He wanted the land that tribes were living on for white settlers, and he didn't care about the consequences. General Winfield Scott was the military leader who oversaw the Cherokee removal. He was a career soldier who believed in following orders. The other people involved were likely motivated by a combination of greed, prejudice, and fear. Many of them probably thought that they were doing the right thing by getting rid of the Native Americans, either because they believed in white supremacy or because they stood to benefit from the removal. The Trail of Tears wasn't just a single event. It was a series of forced relocations that happened over several years. The first major removal took place in 1838 when the U.S. Army, 6th and 7th Infantry Divisions were sent to Georgia to force the Cherokee onto the Trail of Tears. By December of that year, over 16,000 Cherokee had been moved to Oklahoma. Other tribes like the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole faced similar journeys during the 1830s and 40s. To understand why this happened, it helps to know a bit about the history of the United States in the early 1800s. After the War of 1812, the U.S. government was eager to expand its territory and control over the western frontier. The government was also concerned about the growing number of Native Americans living in the eastern states. Many white Americans feared that the two groups were becoming too integrated, and they wanted to keep them separate. So the government came up with a plan to move the tribes west of the Mississippi River and replace them with white settlers. As you already know, This forced removal had a devastating impact on Native American populations. Thousands of people died from disease, starvation, and exhaustion during the journey. Once they reached Indian Territory, they found it difficult to adjust to the new environment, and many of their traditional ways of life were disrupted. Despite these challenges, Native Americans showed incredible resilience and determination. They rebuilt their communities and created new ways of life in unfamiliar territory. They also continued to preserve their cultures and traditions. Today, the Trail of Tears is remembered as a tragic and shameful chapter in American history. It serves as a reminder of the human cost of westward expansion and the importance of protecting the rights of indigenous peoples. Several museums and memorials have been established to honor the memory of those who died during the forced relocations. If you want to learn more about the Trail of Tears, I encourage you to visit these places and explore the stories of the people who were affected by this historical event. Remember, history isn't just about dates and battles. It's also about the stories of pain, loss, and survival that have shaped our world. By learning about the Trail of Tears, we can honor the memory of those who suffered and work toward a better future for everyone. And just a heads up, this platform might try to show you another video after this one. So, if you want to keep watching this channel, click that thumbs up button to help the platform's algorithm recognize that you want to see more videos like this.